My name is Detective Samuel Rodriguez, and I have been serving with the Los Angeles Police Department for 21 years. In over 2 decades of investigating the darkest corners of human behavior, I have encountered every type of criminal you can imagine. But sometimes you meet someone whose story forces you to confront the most uncomfortable questions about love, betrayal, and the lengths people will go to when they discover that their entire life has been built on lies. This is the story that Alan Carter told me 7 months ago, sitting in his maximum security prison cell where he is serving 2 consecutive life sentences for first-degree murder. When Alan first agreed to speak with me, I expected to hear the typical justifications and excuses that most killers use to rationalize their actions. Instead, I heard the devastating confession of a man whose love for his wife had blinded him to a betrayal so complete and calculating that it destroyed not just his marriage, but his entire sense of reality. Alan Carter was 38 years old when he committed the murders that would define the rest of his life. He was a successful businessman who owned Carter Electronics, a chain of electronic stores that he had built from a single shop into a multi-million-dollar enterprise over the course of 15 years. Alan was not someone who had been handed success on a silver platter. He had worked 16-hour days for years, sacrificing his health, his social life, and his peace of mind to build something meaningful and lasting. Alan met Diana Morrison when she was 25 years old, working as a marketing consultant for small businesses. She was beautiful, intelligent, and charming, with the kind of magnetic personality that made everyone around her feel special and important. When Alan first saw Diana at a business networking event, he was immediately captivated, not just by her appearance, but by her confidence and her apparent passion for helping entrepreneurs succeed. "Detective Rodriguez," Alan said, his voice filled with a mixture of love and profound sadness. "Diana was the most incredible woman I had ever met. She was not just beautiful, though she was absolutely stunning. She had this way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the world, like everything I had accomplished mattered because she was there to share it with me." Alan courted Diana for 8 months before proposing. He had never been married before, having devoted his 20s and early 30s to building his business empire. Diana represented everything he had been missing in his life. She was sophisticated, cultured, and seemed genuinely impressed by his success, while also challenging him to grow as a person. Their wedding was a lavish affair attended by 300 guests and held at the most exclusive venue in Beverly Hills. Alan spared no expense, wanting to give Diana the fairy tale wedding she claimed to have dreamed of since childhood. The photographs from that day show a man who appears to be the happiest person alive, standing beside a woman whose smile seems to light up every room she enters. The early years of their marriage were the happiest of Alan's life. He continued to work long hours, but now he had someone to come home to, someone who would ask about his day and celebrate his victories and comfort him during the inevitable setbacks that come with running a business. Diana seemed genuinely interested in his work, often offering marketing advice that proved to be invaluable. Diana made everything better. Alan told me, his eyes taking on a distant look as he remembered those happier times. "If I had a difficult day dealing with suppliers or problem employees, she would listen to me vent and somehow make me laugh about it. If we had a particularly good month, she would plan a celebration, dinner, or a weekend getaway to acknowledge the achievement. She made me feel like we were a team working together toward shared goals." For 8 years, Alan and Diana built a life together that seemed perfect from the outside. They lived in a mansion in the Hollywood Hills, traveled to exotic locations around the world, and were regarded as one of Los Angeles' most successful power couples. Diana had given up her consulting business after their marriage, claiming that she wanted to focus on supporting Alan and perhaps starting a family when the time was right. But there were subtle signs that Alan missed, signs that in retrospect revealed the true nature of his marriage and his wife. Diana never seemed particularly interested in having children, despite claiming that motherhood was her ultimate goal. She was always vague about her family background and discouraged Alan from getting too close to her relatives. Most troubling, she seemed to have an unusual interest in the financial details of Alan's business, asking detailed questions about cash flow, profit margins, and asset valuation. "I should have paid more attention to those warning signs," Alan said, his voice filled with self-recrimination. "But I was so grateful that such an amazing woman had chosen to be with me that I ignored anything that might threaten that happiness." I told myself that her interest in the business showed how much she cared about our future together. The first crack in Alan's perfect world appeared when he noticed irregularities in his company's financial records. Large sums of money were being transferred out of the business accounts and into investment vehicles that Alan had never approved. When he investigated further, he discovered that Diana had been given access to these accounts through a power of attorney that he had no memory of signing. When Alan confronted Diana about the financial irregularities, she had a ready explanation. She claimed that she had been working with a financial advisor to diversify their investments and create tax shelters that would protect their wealth. She produced documents that appeared to show legitimate investment strategies and promised to provide more detailed explanations once she had organized all the paperwork. Alan wanted to believe his wife, so he accepted her explanation, even though something about the situation felt wrong. He told himself that Diana was probably just trying to surprise him with her financial acumen, and that his suspicions were unfounded and unfair to the woman who had stood by him for 8 years. But over the following weeks, Alan became increasingly uncomfortable with Diana's behavior. She was taking more frequent trips out of town, claiming to be visiting investment advisors and attending financial planning seminars. She was receiving phone calls at all hours that she would take in private, speaking in hushed tones that made Alan wonder who she was talking to and why the conversations needed to be kept secret. The truth began to emerge on a Thursday evening in November when Alan decided to surprise Diana by coming home early from work with flowers and reservations at her favorite restaurant. He had been feeling guilty about his suspicions and wanted to do something romantic to reconnect with his wife and remind himself why he had fallen in love with her. But when Alan arrived at their mansion, he found Diana in their bedroom with another man. They were not just having an affair, they were poring over financial documents and business plans that belonged to Alan's company, discussing strategies for liquidating assets and transferring money to offshore accounts. The man with Diana was Mark Stevens, Alan's best friend and business partner. Mark had been Alan's closest confidant for over 10 years, the person he trusted more than anyone else in the world besides Diana. Mark had been the best man at Alan's wedding, had been a regular guest at their home, and had been present at every major milestone in Alan's personal and professional life. Alan stood in the doorway, watching his wife and his best friend betray him in the most fundamental way possible. They were not just having an affair, they were systematically stealing his life's work, planning to destroy the business he had spent 15 years building and disappear with millions of dollars that represented every sacrifice he had ever made. Diana and Mark noticed Alan standing there, and instead of showing shame or remorse, they looked annoyed that their planning session had been interrupted. Diana pulled on a robe and walked toward Alan with the kind of confident stride that suggested she had been preparing for this moment for some time. "Alan, you are home early," Diana said calmly, as if she had been caught reading a book, rather than plotting to destroy her husband's life. "I suppose we need to have a conversation about where things stand between us." Alan stared at his wife, unable to process what he was seeing and hearing. The woman he had loved more than his own life was standing in front of him, acting as if their marriage had been nothing more than a business arrangement that had reached its natural conclusion. "How long has this been going on?" Alan asked, his voice barely audible. Mark stood up from the bed and began putting on his shirt, acting as if this were a normal social situation, rather than the complete destruction of a friendship and a marriage. "Look, Alan," Mark said with the casual tone he had always used when discussing business problems, "this is not personal. Diana and I have developed feelings for each other, and we have also identified some opportunities to maximize the value of your assets. We were going to discuss this with you when the time was right." "Maximize the value of my assets," Alan repeated, feeling like he was in some kind of nightmare. "You mean steal everything I have worked for?" Diana rolled her eyes as if Alan was being unnecessarily dramatic about a minor disagreement. "Alan, you are a good man, but you are boring," she said matter-of-factly. "You work all the time, you never want to travel anywhere exciting, you do not understand fashion or culture or any of the things that make life worth living. Mark understands me in ways that you never could." Alan felt like he had been physically struck. After 8 years of marriage, his wife was telling him that everything he had believed about their relationship had been an illusion. So this whole marriage has been what Alan asked. Some kind of long-term con game. Diana shrugged, as if the question was not particularly important. "I married you because you had money and potential," she said. "I stayed married to you because the money kept growing and because I thought I could eventually mold you into someone more interesting. But after 8 years, I have realized that you are never going to be the kind of man I really want to be with." Mark walked over and put his arm around Diana's waist in a gesture that was clearly meant to emphasize their relationship and Alan's exclusion from it. "The thing is, Alan," Mark said, "we have been working on a plan that will allow Diana to move on with her life while ensuring that you are not left with nothing. We have structured some investments that will give you enough money to start over somewhere else, maybe buy a small business in some quiet town where you can be happy." Alan stared at these two people who had been the most important figures in his life, trying to understand how they could stand there calmly discussing the destruction of everything he cared about as if they were planning a dinner menu. "You are talking about stealing my company," Alan said. "We are talking about restructuring your assets," Diana corrected. "You will get your fair share and we will get ours. It is really quite equitable when you think about it." Alan realized that this conversation was not a negotiation or a plea for understanding. Diana and Mark had already made their decisions and were simply informing him of what was going to happen to his life, his business, and his future. "How long have you two been planning this?" Alan asked. Diana and Mark exchanged glances, and Alan could see that they were deciding how much truth to reveal. "About 3 years," Mark said. "We initially thought we might be able to work with you as a partner, but it became clear that you would never agree to the kind of aggressive financial strategies that would maximize returns." 3 years, Alan repeated. "You have been planning to betray me for 3 years." Diana walked to her dresser and began putting on jewelry, as if she were getting ready for a normal evening out. "Alan, you are acting like we are criminals," she said. "We are business people who have identified an opportunity. The fact that you cannot see the potential in this arrangement just proves that we are right to move forward without you." Over the following hour, Diana and Mark laid out their plan in detail. They had been slowly transferring money from Alan's business accounts into investment vehicles that they controlled. They had identified buyers for Alan's real estate holdings and had negotiated the sale of his electronic stores to a competitor. They had even arranged for Alan to be removed from the board of directors of his own company through a complex series of legal maneuvers. The most devastating part of their revelation was that this was not a crime of passion or opportunity. Diana had married Alan with the specific intention of eventually stealing his wealth. She had spent 8 years gaining his trust, learning about his business and positioning herself to take everything he had worked for. Mark had been recruited into the conspiracy 3 years earlier when Diana had seduced him and convinced him that Alan was too conservative and risk-averse to maximize the potential of his business empire. Mark had used his position as Alan's business partner to facilitate the theft, providing inside information and signing documents that transferred control of various assets. "You have to understand," Alan, Diana said as she finished getting dressed, "this is not about hurting you. This is about all of us getting what we want. You want security and simplicity, and we are going to give you enough money to have both. Mark and I want excitement and unlimited potential, and we are going to use your assets to create that life for ourselves." Alan stood in his own bedroom, listening to his wife and best friend explain how they had systematically destroyed his life over the course of years, and felt something break inside him that would never be repaired. "What happens now?" Alan asked. "Now you sign some papers that will finalize the asset transfers," Diana said, "and we all move on with our lives. You can keep the house and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Mark and I will take the business assets and start fresh somewhere else. Everyone wins." But Alan was beginning to realize that Diana and Mark had miscalculated something important in their planning. They had assumed that Alan would react to their betrayal with the same cold business logic that had motivated their conspiracy. They thought he would weigh the options rationally and conclude that accepting their terms was better than fighting a battle he could not win. What they had not anticipated was that Alan's love for Diana had been real and profound, and that discovering the extent of her deception would transform that love into something much darker and more dangerous. Alan Carter had been betrayed in the most fundamental way possible by the two people he trusted most in the world. The life he had built, the marriage he had cherished, and the friendship he had valued were all revealed to be elaborate lies designed to facilitate the theft of everything he had worked for. As Alan looked at Diana putting on the jewelry he had given her and Mark adjusting the expensive watch that had been a gift for his birthday, Alan made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He was not going to accept their terms or sign their papers or quietly disappear so that they could enjoy the fruits of their betrayal. Alan Carter was going to make them pay for what they had done to him, and he was going to make sure that their victory was as short-lived and hollow as his marriage had been meaningful and real. After discovering Diana and Mark's betrayal, Alan did not confront them further that evening. Instead, he calmly told them that he needed time to process what they had revealed and that they should continue with their plans while he decided how to respond. Diana and Mark seemed pleased with this reaction, interpreting it as evidence that Alan was going to cooperate with their demands rather than fight them. But Alan was not planning to cooperate. He was planning something much more permanent and final. Over the next several days, Alan maintained the pretense of considering their proposal while secretly beginning to plan their destruction. He used his knowledge of their personalities, their weaknesses, and their plans to devise a strategy that would not just stop their theft but would ensure that they paid the ultimate price for their betrayal. Detective Rodriguez, Alan told me, his voice taking on the cold, calculated tone that still chills me to remember. I was not angry anymore. Anger is hot and impulsive, and what I needed was something much more controlled and methodical. I had been betrayed by the two people I trusted most, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly what that betrayal had cost them. Alan spent 3 weeks studying Diana and Mark's movements, learning their new routines and identifying the vulnerabilities in their security and planning. He discovered that they had moved in together at a luxury apartment downtown and were living openly as a couple while finalizing their theft of his assets. They seemed to believe that Alan's initial calm reaction meant that he had accepted defeat and would not cause problems for them. Alan also used this time to secure evidence of their financial crimes. He hired a private investigator to document their theft and worked with a forensic accountant to trace all the money that had been stolen from his accounts. Alan was not just planning to kill Diana and Mark, he was planning to destroy their reputations and ensure that even if their plan had succeeded, no one would remember them as anything other than thieves and betrayers. But most importantly, Alan used those 3 weeks to acquire the tools and knowledge he would need to commit murder without being caught. He researched police investigation techniques, studied forensic evidence collection, and learned about surveillance technology that might be used to track his movements. Alan approached the planning of these murders with the same methodical attention to detail that had made him successful in business. On a Friday evening in December, exactly 1 month after discovering their betrayal, Alan put his plan into motion. He knew that Diana and Mark had dinner reservations at an exclusive restaurant downtown and that they would return to their apartment around 10 o'clock. He also knew that their building's security was focused on preventing unauthorized entry rather than monitoring the movements of residents and their guests. Alan arrived at their apartment building at 9:30, wearing a delivery uniform he had purchased and carrying flowers that would serve as his cover for being in the building. The security guard recognized Alan as Diana's husband and allowed him to go upstairs without question, assuming that he was there to surprise his wife with a romantic gesture. Alan used a key that Diana had given him months earlier to enter their apartment. He positioned himself in the living room and waited for them to return from dinner. When Diana and Mark walked through the door, laughing and holding hands, Alan was sitting calmly in their favorite chair, holding a gun he had purchased specifically for this purpose. "Hello, Diana," Alan said quietly. "Hello, Mark. I hope you had a nice dinner because it is going to be your last one." Diana and Mark froze when they saw Alan sitting in their apartment, armed and clearly prepared for violence. The confident arrogance they had displayed during their initial confrontation evaporated immediately, replaced by fear and the beginning of understanding that their betrayal was about to have consequences they had not anticipated. "Alan," Diana said, her voice shaking, "what are you doing here? We had an agreement that you would consider our proposal." "I have considered it," Alan replied. "I have decided that I do not accept your terms." Mark stepped slightly in front of Diana in what appeared to be an attempt to protect her, though his own terror was obvious. "Look, Alan," Mark said, "we can work this out. Maybe we were too aggressive with our initial proposal. We can restructure the deal so that you get a larger share." Alan looked at these two people who had spent years plotting against him and felt nothing but cold satisfaction that they were finally experiencing fear and helplessness. "There's not going to be a restructured deal," Alan said. "There's not going to be any deal at all. You stole from me, you lied to me, and you destroyed my life for money. Now you are going to pay for what you have done." Diana seemed to recover some of her composure and attempted to use the same manipulative tactics that had worked on Alan for so many years. "Alan, please," Diana said, stepping toward him with the seductive smile he had once found irresistible. "You are not a killer. You are a good man who is hurt and angry, but you are not someone who commits murder. We can fix this. We can go back to the way things were." But Alan was no longer susceptible to Diana's manipulation. He had seen her true nature and understood that every moment of affection she had ever shown him had been calculated and false. "Go back to the way things were," Alan repeated. "You mean go back to you pretending to love me while you and Mark steal everything I worked for? Go back to me being the boring husband who pays for your lifestyle while you laugh at me behind my back?" Alan stood up from the chair, still holding the gun pointed at both of them. "I know about the 3 years of planning, Diana. I know that you married me, specifically to steal my money. I know that every kiss, every touch, every time you told me you loved me was part of an elaborate con game, designed to position yourself to take everything I had." Diana's mask finally slipped completely, and Alan saw the cold, calculating person she had always been beneath the loving wife persona she had maintained for 8 years. "Fine," Diana said, her voice hard and contemptuous. "You want the truth, Alan. The truth is that I never loved you. I married you because you were weak and successful and gullible. I stayed married to you because the money was good and because I thought I could eventually mold you into someone interesting." Mark tried to signal Diana to stop talking, but she was beyond caring about consequences, now that her deception had been fully exposed. "You want to know what I really think about you, Alan," Diana continued. "I think you are pathetic. You are boring, predictable, and so desperate for love that you believed every lie I told you for 8 years. You work 16 hours a day at a job that any competent manager could do, and you think that makes you special." Diana laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "The funniest part," Diana said, "is that you actually thought I enjoyed being married to you. Do you have any idea how tedious it was? Pretending to care about your boring business problems and your stupid success stories. I had to fake every orgasm for 8 years because you are as boring in bed as you are everywhere else." Alan listened to Diana's cruel revelations and felt the last remnants of his love for her die completely. Whatever she had been to him, whatever he had believed about their marriage was now revealed to be nothing but an elaborate performance designed to facilitate theft. "Thank you for being honest, Diana," Alan said. "It makes what I am about to do much easier." Alan shot Mark, first putting 2 bullets in his chest and watching him collapse onto the expensive carpet they had purchased with Alan's stolen money. Mark died quickly, without having the opportunity to offer any final words or apologies. Diana screamed and tried to run toward the bedroom, but Alan caught her easily. He forced her to sit on the couch where they had spent so many evenings watching television and pretending to be a happy couple. "Before I kill you, Diana," Alan said, "I want you to know exactly what your betrayal has cost you. I have documented every dollar you stole, every lie you told, and every crime you committed. Even if your plan had succeeded, you would have eventually been caught and prosecuted." Alan pulled out a folder containing the evidence he had gathered over the past 3 weeks. "I have recordings of your conversations with Mark about stealing my money," Alan continued. "I have financial records showing exactly how you transferred my assets to accounts you control. I have evidence that you forged my signature on dozens of legal documents." Diana stared at the evidence, understanding for the first time that her careful planning had not been as perfect as she had believed. "But more importantly," Alan said, "I have made sure that everyone will know what kind of person you really were. Your family, your friends, everyone who thought you were loving wife will learn that you were nothing but a thief and a liar who destroyed the life of a man who loved you." Alan had indeed spent the previous weeks preparing a comprehensive dossier of Diana and Mark's crimes, which he had arranged to be delivered to police journalists and everyone in their social circle immediately after their deaths. He wanted to ensure that their reputations would be destroyed as completely as they had destroyed his life. You will not be remembered as successful criminals, Alan told Diana. You will be remembered as pathetic con artists who got caught and paid the price for their greed. Diana finally seemed to understand that Alan was serious about killing her and that no amount of manipulation or seduction would change his mind. Please, Alan, Diana begged. I know I hurt you, but we can work this out. I can give you back all the money. I can disappear and you will never see me again. You do not have to do this. But Alan was beyond negotiation or compromise. Diana had revealed the true nature of their relationship, and he could never forgive her for the years of deception or forget the cruelty of her final revelations. You told me that you faked every moment of affection for 8 years, Alan said. You told me that I was pathetic and boring, and that you laughed at me behind my back. You stole my money, my business, and my trust. There is nothing you can say or do that will make up for what you have done to me. Diana tried once more to appeal to whatever remained of Alan's feelings for her. But Alan, I gave you 8 good years, Diana said. Even if I did not love you, I made you happy. I was a good wife to you in every way that mattered. That has to count for something. Those words were perhaps the most devastating thing Diana could have said, because they revealed that even in her final moments she did not understand the magnitude of her betrayal or feel any genuine remorse for what she had done. You were never a good wife to me, Diana, Alan said quietly. A good wife does not spend 3 years planning to steal her husband's life savings. A good wife does not pretend to love someone while laughing at them with her lover. A good wife does not marry someone specifically to destroy them. Alan raised the gun and pointed it at Diana's chest. But Detective Rodriguez, Alan said to me, the worst part was what she said next. Even with a gun pointed at her, even knowing that she was about to die, Diana looked at me with complete contempt and said the words that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Diana's final words to Alan were delivered with the same casual cruelty she had shown throughout their confrontation. You know what, Alan, Diana said. I am glad I hurt you. I am glad I stole your money and destroyed your pathetic life. You deserved everything that happened to you because you were stupid enough to believe that someone like me could love someone like you. Diana smiled as she delivered this final insult. The best part, Diana continued, is that even after you kill me, you are still going to be alone and boring and pathetic. I may be dead, but you are still going to be you, and that is a much worse fate than anything you can do to me. Alan shot Diana 3 times, watching her die on the same couch where she had pretended to love him for so many years. But even as she died, Diana maintained her contemptuous expression as if she had won some final victory over him. After both Diana and Mark were dead, Alan calmly called the police and confessed to both murders. He made no attempt to escape or to claim self-defense or temporary insanity. He simply waited for the authorities to arrive and took full responsibility for what he had done. During his interrogation, Alan provided complete details of both murders and explained his motivations without showing any remorse or regret. He also provided all the evidence he had gathered of Diana and Mark's financial crimes, ensuring that their theft would be fully documented, even though they were dead. Alan's trial lasted 6 weeks and became a media sensation. The prosecution portrayed him as a cold-blooded killer who had murdered 2 people in premeditated attacks. The defense tried to argue temporary insanity, claiming that Alan had been driven mad by the discovery of his wife's betrayal and his business partner's complicity. But the methodical nature of Alan's planning, the 3 weeks he had spent preparing for the murders, and the calm manner in which he had executed his plan made it impossible to claim that his actions had been the result of temporary insanity or emotional disturbance. The most compelling testimony came from the forensic accountant who had analyzed Diana and Mark's theft. He testified that they had stolen over $4 million from Alan's accounts and that their plan would have left Alan financially ruined and legally responsible for debts he had not incurred. But even this evidence of the victims' crimes could not excuse the fact that Alan had committed premeditated murder. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on both counts of first-degree murder. Alan was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial and sentencing, he showed no emotion and expressed no regret for his actions. Detective Rodriguez, Alan said to me during our final interview, "People ask me if I regret killing Diana and Mark. The honest answer is no. They destroyed my life, systematically and deliberately, over the course of years, and they deserve to pay for what they did." Alan paused, staring at the concrete walls of his prison cell. "But I do regret that I wasted 8 years of my life loving someone who was incapable of loving me back. I regret that I trusted people who saw me as nothing but a source of money to be exploited. I regret that I was so blind to what was happening around me." Alan looked directly at me, his eyes filled with a pain that seemed to go deeper than any physical torture. "The worst part, Detective Rodriguez, is not that Diana never loved me. The worst part is that she was right about me. I am boring and predictable and pathetic. I built a successful business, but I was too weak and gullible to protect it from the people closest to me. I loved my wife completely, but I was too boring to keep her interested in our marriage." As our interview concluded, I found myself struggling with questions that have no easy answers. Alan Carter had committed 2 brutal murders, killing his wife and best friend in cold blood. By any legal or moral standard, he was a killer who deserved the punishment he had received. But Diana and Mark had also committed cruel and calculated crimes, spending years systematically stealing from someone who trusted them and destroying his life for financial gain. They had escaped legal consequences for their theft only because they were killed before they could be prosecuted. Alan Carter sits in prison today, serving 2 life sentences for murders he has never denied committing. He spends his days writing business plans for companies he will never own and reading about investment strategies for money he will never have. The case of Alan Carter serves as a stark reminder of how betrayal can transform love into hatred, and how the people closest to us are often capable of the most devastating cruelty. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us most, and sometimes the price of that trust is everything we hold dear. Sometimes love makes us vulnerable to people who see that vulnerability as an opportunity for exploitation, and sometimes protecting ourselves requires destroying the people who claim to care about us most. Alan Carter loved his wife completely and trusted his best friend absolutely, and that love and trust were used as weapons to destroy everything he had worked for. In the end, his quest for justice became indistinguishable from his thirst for revenge, and the price he paid was not just his freedom but his soul. If this story affected you as deeply as it affected me, please subscribe to our channel for more true crime confessions that explore the complex motivations behind the darkest human actions. Next week, we will hear from a mother who discovered her teenage daughter's secret life and made a choice that would haunt her family forever. Until then, remember that the people we love most have the power to hurt us most, and that trust once broken can never be fully repaired.